Hey everyone, welcome back to the TraderLion channel. This is Richard and Ross, and continuing on with our Chart of the Week series, we'll be discussing LCID Lucid Group, an interesting EV play here, and a stock that's been acting quite well, even given the recent market weakness. So I think this is definitely an interesting chart to discuss. And this is one of the charts on Ross Haber's Top 10 report that he publishes twice a week. And if you're interested in that, click the link down below in the description, and it also should be popping up right here on the screen. So with that, Ross, I'll hand it over to you and just kind of, I guess, talk through this chart. What do you like about it, and what are you watching for in the coming days and weeks?
For starters, we've, as everyone well knows, we've been experiencing a bit of market weakness, especially over the last 3 or 4 days of last week. We were looking good Monday and Tuesday through Friday of last week. That all ended. And leadership really kind of took a crunch with the markets finally last week, right? So we saw semiconductors, some held up, but some of those started to break, and just a bigger push into a lot of those more defensive, safer names, utilities, oil and gas. I mean, you're not seeing money moving into growth. If anything, it's continuing to come out of a lot of the old leadership and into that safer stuff, regional banks, oil, gas, utilities. That seems to be where a lot of the volume and movement was. So Lucid, on the other hand, is a growth play in so much as, what the action we're seeing here is not based on current earnings and revenues. It's based on, it's the EV story. It's the group altogether. You've got your classical, your regular gas-driven auto manufacturers now coming out with electric vehicles. So Ford's electric 150 along with GM. I think it's GMC. I don't know if it's the Sierra, or anyway, it's their electric pickup truck. So that's what's driving those stocks much higher, especially over the last few days. So Lucid is, playing along in that group, but it also has, even though we're not seeing current revenues and earnings, they did just release their cars. They've just begun to sell. And as we move, when we move on, we're going to see that the institutional sponsorship has really picked up. So that is, and it's a quality sponsorship in just a matter of 3 quarters. And that coincides with this move we're seeing here. They started selling cars. I think we were discussing somewhere, in October, they made the announcement. That's right when sponsorship started to ramp. And I mean, you can see the volume here. We can see, going straight back to what Ray talks about, this volume right here, highest volume. I don't know if it's sincere. I mean, it's telling you something. You look back almost a year and it stands out. So huge. This is letting you know that, that's not, as Bill would always say, that's not your Grandma Tilly buying this stock here. That's, institutions piling into that stock, right? And then it does exactly what we want to see here. It holds up tight, barely shakes to its, 10-day line, holds up relatively well, tightens up and goes again. Unfortunately, market weakness and what have you, we've seen some pressure on the stock, but on a relative basis, for a stock of this nature, especially one that doesn't even have the current earnings, it's much more future expected, which is the way growth stocks typically are. But in general, textbook, we like to see some of those earnings already printed in black and white. But in this particular case, because the group is so strong and the move that's going on, obviously the potential is seen there. The sponsorship has ramped, and again, we'll see one of IBD's flagship funds on there. So once this volume ramps and you see it in, we always talk about the group, how important that move is. So the group we'll see is, I think, number 5 out of 197. And it's clearly been standing out, just the leaders in that group. So Lucid has been no different. While the market's been under serious pressure, especially the NASDAQ, which I would tend to compare Lucid to, not so much the S&P or the Dow. Lucid has held up just underneath its 65-day exponential, and slightly. It held up really tight. You can see corresponding volume is light. There's really no sellers in there. This shakeout, I always paid attention. We would go back over stocks to, after a move had happened. And I always remember Bill looking back, and he always liked to see a shakeout underneath a significant area. I would tell you, we'd love it even more if we saw the shakeout under this instead, right? It cleans it out that much more. But in general, this is the action you want to see. It holds up incredibly tight. You get a quick shakeout. And now volume, as volume comes back in, that's clearly upside volume. And we poked a bit through that that resistance area or our pivot right at 42.50. So assuming this continues, you can see relative strengths leading the way, right? On a relative to that point, it's really sticking up there. This would be one if it continues to do the volume and pushes through that area next week. For those reasons alone, I'd have to take, at least get a position started there. While the NASDAQ, is clearly struggling underneath its major moving averages, the S&P it holds up above for now. And aside from Lucid and maybe Tesla, the Fords and GMs of the world are on the S&P or the Dow and not the NASDAQ. So anyway, I'm not going to continue on. It's kind of that, we've got, look at the volume here. We've got volume dries up as we move sideways.
Right.
Moving averages eventually converge to the upside. We get that launching pad move. And this is showing incredible relative strength as the general market's correcting. So, and now we're right at that point where it becomes interesting, and it's very easy to manage risk versus a major moving average or a major price level. So between risk reward, how strong it is, so on and so forth, especially given the current general market, this is probably, we'll see the market got hurt badly enough last week that this is probably the smallest top 10 list I've had in a very long time. I think it's the top 6 list this weekend, if I'm not mistaken. And I would say this is top of the list if I had to pick one.
Yeah. And Ross, I think you brought up some great points. And I just want to point out a few additional things on the stock chart before we head over to Marketsmith. First, it has pulled back quite a bit, but if you draw a line right from the high volume close from that significant breakout point, you can see how that's been respected. Clear show of respect here. Nice hammer candles off that level, starting this most recent push upwards. And also, it's very interesting to me how this kind of entire move started with a gap down on really high volume, almost like this was subtle accumulation this day, which kind of started this. Then we had a push up, a launch pad which formed here. And then right when they had, I think, their first deliveries in late October, that's when the volume really came in and started this initial push. So I think definitely a stock to be very focused on. And I also like how the average of the volume basically has increased significantly, basically suggesting that more institutions are getting involved with the stock. And just one more thing, this day right here, this breakout, when you see that huge volume, that kind of woke up the stock, because right in this area, I think this was a spec initially. It's just kind of dead. It's just kind of trading up and down, choppy, but this is really where it changed character on this big breakout. So potentially starting a new uptrend. I think if the market is cooperative, this is definitely one to have on your watch list. And we'll be watching this pivot very closely. So with that, let's head on over to Marketsmith, look at the fundamentals, what they have, and also talk about the kind of overall group move. So here we are on Marketsmith. You can see down here looking at the earnings and sales, nothing so far really to see. And looking at the annual estimates, it isn't supposed to make any money. But like Ross said, this is kind of trading off the story, the EV play, and the expectation of future earnings. And this obviously has a lot of interest from institutions. You can see institutional ownership increasing steadily over the past few quarters, with a huge jump starting in June of 2021, going from 31 funds to 177, which is very significant. And also you've got Franklin growth in here with a position. So that just kind of adds to my personal conviction in this type of stock. And yeah, I think this is definitely one to watch. Like we said, it's not really earning anything as of this moment, but you've got that auto manufacturers group with Ford and GM being strong, and the overall group ranked 5 out of 197. So with that, Ross, was there anything I missed? What else would you add on the fundamental side of things?
No, I think you've caught it perfectly there. It's one of those things where it's a big theme play. And I think it's pretty obvious between the volume and the sponsorship, even though we don't have the earnings and sales yet. I think there's some very, very obvious clues that some smart money out there believes that they're going to sell some cars moving forward. So it'll be interesting to see how it shapes up.
Absolutely. And you see the relative strength line making an uptrend over the past 2 days. You've got that clear pivot that Ross has basically identified in the top 10 report. And also, Ross, maybe let's quickly bring up the charts of F and GM and just kind of show how
Sure.
the overall group is shaping up here.
Here, and just really quickly before we go, I was just going to go to Lucid's
Right.
weekly, where you can see volume finally fell
Nice.
way off on
Nice
that
outside bar too.
Yep. And then you hold super tight. You get, with that shakeout, it comes out really nicely on the weekly. You get that big outside up or bullish engulfing pattern, big increase in volume, and nicer to see that. And if you see it, it engulfs the last, 1, 2, 3 weeks. Volume picks up. I mean, so to me, that's a very bullish price volume action there. So just wanted to point that out. We'll go back to Ford.
Yeah, nothing much to say on Ford. It might be a little bit short-term extended, but I mean, given the market weakness, this is like one of the strongest stocks in the market, holding well above the key moving averages, above the 10-day. Super strong breakout from this kind of flat base type setup here. You've got to pivot around this area, and I think GM, it might have fallen off in the past few days, but this is strong as well if you want to bring that chart up.
Sure. And if I'm not mistaken, we got Ford on the top 10 list on that original breakout through 2149. So anyway, so yeah, GM not as strong, like you said, but that could easily re-break out. That was kind of very fast up off the bottom, right? So you went from its 50 to 5,200 day moving average area, 2 days of gap, and moved straight to new highs. I'll tell you, the majority of the time, that's going to need to take a rest. Whether it comes back in or holds up there, a lot of time, the majority of the time, that will not continue to follow through. So when I see that straight up off the bottom breakout, if I rarely, I'll get like a mental health position on, right? Just something small. If it's something like I have to own, but the majority of the time, I won't touch those breakouts, and I'll wait to see how it behaves. And most of the time, you benefit from waiting. But other than that, I mean, this is showing clear strength as well. GM and Ford have some hot electric pickups coming out that people are waiting on. So that's all. It's a hot story across the board, even for the old school guys, with some new stuff.
Perfect. And yeah, this is completely normal action. Maybe it just consolidates above 60, lets that 50-day moving average catch up, and then maybe we see another push towards the breakout. And it looks like this is only a stage 1 base, so a nice long-term base.
Yeah.
Looks pretty good, honestly, this setup. So
here's the weekly right there. Check that out. Look at volume. So not to cut you off, and I just figured since we're in here, we'll throw up a Ford weekly while we're at it, and look at that. So it's hard to ignore that group. And these things are, I mean, Ford and GM are actually showing the growth, right? So I guess we're looking for Lucid to eventually put some earnings and revenues on the board along with these guys, and Tesla, which is taking a well-deserved break probably at this point.
Absolutely. And just go to a monthly chart very quickly here. I think it formed this recent consolidation right over the 2011 highs. So it's a pretty significant level that it just broke out of, and we'll have to see whether it continues to trend. But I think pretty much we'll leave it there. Thanks so much for watching. Lucid, definitely a name to have on your radar, especially considering the weakness in growth and how strong it's been over the course of the past week. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please go ahead and leave a like down below and subscribe if you haven't already to the TraderLion channel. And we'll see you guys in future videos. Thanks.